Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and betting live stream for this week's Travelers Championship. Going to go through everything you guys need to know to go out there, get your lineups made, get everything settled out there for tomorrow, and go out there and have yourself a week for your exposure. So if you have any questions, now is the time. Go ahead, fire those down in chat. Say hi if you guys haven't already. Cheers to you down there, and let's go ahead and get after it. We've got Nate, David down there, Sean, Zach, Curtis, and Steven down there. Hopefully you guys are having a solid week yourself. Got a few questions, which we'll get to here in a little bit, but just want to say hi to get this thing rocking. And yeah, you said I called the winner with being -6. Lucky guess, I guess. That was a tough, crazy week, wasn't it, out there, Curtis? But glad we got that one correct. Let's go ahead and start this thing off with, first off, look at the golf course, and then a look at the weather forecast over the first few days. This golf course, the Travelers Championship, has undergone a few changes since last year. And I feel like we haven't heard a lot of people talk about it. And while it's not going to have a massive impact on the kind of players that we're looking for, I do think it's going to play a little bit harder this time around. While the winning score last year was still past 20 under. So let's not say that this is going to be a hard track by any means, but it was a lot softer in 2023 than what we're going to have for this year. And we also had a golf course that was tightened up off the tee this year. They've added a little bit more fescue on the golf course here in 2024. They also took a few greens and made them smaller. I think hole 11 was the main one that they took down in size. All in all, 6 holes were revamped here for this golf tournament. So expect to see a little bit of different scoring on those 6 holes in particular. But without all the rain that they got in 2023, this place might be a little bit crispy by the time that we get to the weekend. And just to give you guys an idea of the metrics, they've gotten about 0.6 inches worth of rain in the Cromwell, Connecticut area this month. Normally, they get about 4.5 inches of rain out here in June. So it's a significantly drier month than what they're used to. And last year, there was a whopping 5 or 6 inches of rain that came down in Cromwell. So it's not going to play exactly how we saw last year. I think from the winning score perspective, it is probably going to be in the lower to middle teens under par. So if I'm going to give you guys an idea of what I think would win this golf tournament, right now, without any rain in the forecast, if you gave me something like 16 under par and I was a middle to an elite tier player, I would probably be signing up for that. So that's it in terms of the changes. If we take a look at the wind forecast over the first 2 days, it's nothing too gnarly. The major impact, I think, might be from the temperature out there on Thursday. You can see it's going to be upwards of 90 degrees tomorrow afternoon. You also have some wind gusts, some sustained winds that are coming through as well. So for some of your later starters, I do think it's going to get a little bit bouncier as the day goes on. And if it is actually a 15 to 20 mile an hour wind gust, that could have an impact on your scoring. Now, if we go over here to the NEM model and take a peek at what we have for Friday's forecast, you're going to see that it's not all that crazy on Friday. Friday is a little bit calmer than what we have on Thursday. In fact, those PM winds that are going to cause some potential havoc out there for Thursday aren't present in this forecast. It looks pretty calm no matter which way you slice it up. Your morning starters with slightly lower temperatures, but real calm conditions no matter when you're playing. And then in the afternoon, it warms up a little bit, so maybe that gives them a slight advantage, plus no wind out there in the afternoon. So if there was going to be any sort of defined advantage, if you could find someone going off, I guess it would be early or late over there on Thursday, but then they could go off early over there on Friday. That might be a slight advantage over the other side. But because this isn't a full field event, right, it's a no cut, there's only 70-something players in the field, we don't get these clear-cut defined waves. So trying to go out there and stack one side or the other, like we would for a full field event, isn't going to have nearly as much utility. It's not going to be as easy to pull off. So I don't see that kind of weather edge for this week, even if we had, right, those defined waves. I wouldn't really be leaning into all that much either way. But like I said, for Showdown on Thursday, I think taking some of the earlier starters is a good idea for sure, if you're going with just for the Thursday slate. But outside of that, I just don't see anything that you could play definitively. If you wanted to stack one side or the other, just try and get lucky with trying to pull it off that way, I wouldn't hate putting a few lineups in that way. I don't think I'd take like 20-25% and go out there and stack it in either direction. But if I was a 150 maxer and I wanted to take 10-15% of my lineups and go out there and correlate it weather-wise, I don't think it's the worst idea in human history either. So just wanted to point that out. I think the far more important aspect is I don't know if we're going to get this 20 under par winner. that we've seen the last few times here. The course conditions could be a lot different this time around, and the only rain that they might potentially get would be on Friday. You can see over here on the NEM model, they had that little storm that was coming through around like 7 p.m. So that's supposed to drop about 1/3 of an inch of rain out there on Friday. If that ends up coming through, maybe over the weekend, it's not as difficult as what it is to start the week. But Thursday and Friday, where they've had no rain the last week, it's just going to be sunny, 95 degrees out there for Thursday. I've got a sneaking suspicion that it's not going to be that birdie fest that we had from last year, at least early in the week. So that's what I'll say about the weather. We'll circle back on that when we're talking about props a little bit later. But now is the time to talk about some DFS, talk about some fantasy lineups, a few players that I like for this week. And of course, to go over any of your specific questions. So if you have anything you want to pick my brain about, go ahead, throw it down in the live chat. We're going to go through a few players that I want to point out on top of the guys that I've already talked up out there in the Monday show. So Xander Schauffele is going to be an example of that. It's something that I added to the Patreon sheet this week is a player note tab. So I've got a player note for all 72 players in this week's field, talking about just a little nugget or two of information that I really think is important for that said player. And you're going to see a few of them on here. They're really short notes. Some of them are like, you can see the one for Morikawa, right? It's like short, right to the point. Form and course fit are ideal, right? I'm not trying to make it rocket science out here, but more so just to make it a little bit easier to point out information for some of my Patreon subscribers. So just wanted to point that out. If you're on the Patreon, you've probably already seen that. I'm not going to be able to do that. Just a little bit of a PSA there. I'm not going to be able to do that for like full field events. It took me about 2 hours to go through and do all the player notes out there for this kind of field. A full field event would take 5-6 hours. And I've already got enough on my plate. So unfortunately, I can't be doing that for a full field event. But for these signature events going forward, I 100% will be doing this. It's very reasonable for a full field, a signature event, not so much when there's 156 players. All right, let's catch up on these questions. So what's going on, Nathan? You said, is it wise to fade Scotty for Ludwig or a Xander in cash? So in cash lineups, the thought process there would be the price tag. If you're fading Scotty Scheffler, it's not the talent level. He's clearly the best play on the slate when it comes to a pure fantasy point projection. If you take a look at my fantasy point projections, he's got by far the highest out of anyone in the field. However, he costs $12,500. So in a cash lineup, there's a lot of opportunity cost there. If you're spending $12,500, that means that you can't take a 9K guy. That's probably pushing you from a 9, maybe even a 10K player down into that $7,000 range, maybe even down to the lower 7Ks. I definitely think there's an option for fading somebody like Scotty. In fact, for fading guys like a Scotty, a Scheffler, even an Aberg up top and dropping down into that 9K range. So it's all about the rest of your build, right? If you're getting enough utility with that salary, like if that $2,000-$3,000 is going to make a difference in your lineup, if it's going to get you from spots that are a little bit sketchy to for sure, top 20 sort of players, then do it. If that $2,500 is taking you from, just like a 5 out of 10 to a 7 out of 10, probably not worth it. So it all depends on the rest of your build. I like Scotty for cash this week, but like I said, there's a time and place for probably not playing him too. What are my thoughts on Brendan Todd? Terrible form, but is a good course fit. So that's pretty much exactly what my player note says on him out there, Dave. Bad form, but a really good course fit. So you're going to have to figure out whether you like him or not, right? Out there at $6,000. Can't give away every single player from my player pool this week, but that's essentially my take on him. Sean says, can I share my opinion on Webb and Jake Knapp? So Jake Knapp is one that he's got sketchy form, also sketchy course fit. So as you can imagine, he doesn't rate all that well for me this week. Webb Simpson has sketchy form, but better course fit. So if I was going to choose between those two options, I would take a Webb Simpson, as both of them are essentially unowned. But yeah, both are like, I'd say Webb's a 5 out of 10 for me, maybe even a 4 out of 10. Jake Knapp's like a 2 out of 10, unfortunately. And I love Knapp. He's actually one of my favorite players on tour. He's a down-to-earth guy. He's not too big for the show, as some people would say, but I don't think it's the best week for him. Zach says to smash a like button and smash Griot. I agree with you there, Zach. Go ahead, smash that like button, everyone. And I do like myself some Griot this week. What's going on, Curtis? What's going on, Steven? We got Rev down there, Michael as well. Hopefully you guys are having a solid one. Can't forget about my boy Philly as well. Kep says, surprised you were a little bit earlier this time. There you go. I got you on time this time, Kep, who's the one guy that I'm playing in a single entry. So if I had to narrow it down to one player, which is always tough, my top play in my modeling is Corey Connors. So if I had to just give you one guy to play this week, if you're trusting the modeling, course fit, analytics, shots gained metrics, you name it, it's Corey Connors this week. If you're somebody that's looking for safety, the answer might be Scotty for you. It might be Xander Schauffele, who I really like up top. He's my top play this week. My top modeling play would be Xander Schauffele. All kind of depends on what you're looking for. But I'll say Corey Connors number one. If you have the salary, maybe it's Xander Schauffele. But yeah, those are my top two plays. What's going on, Max? Thoughts on Batia this week? Is he chalky? I wouldn't say he's chalky. He's also not a low-owned play. He's not somebody that's going to be sub 5%, but I also don't have him over the 10% mark. So Max, he's kind of in that in-between range when it comes to ownership. So if you play him in 15, 20% of lineups, you're going to be getting leverage there. So I wouldn't call him chalk. However, he's also not a leverage play. What's going on, Fizzer? Thank you for putting out the individual player comments. Absolutely. I thought it would be helpful. I'm glad that you find it helpful, man. If it's going to be something that you guys enjoy going forward, I'll try and do it for some of these smaller fields where it's a little bit more reasonable. Strategy wise, are there any sort of unique builds that I'm looking at in a signature event? So I don't change up my strategy that much, Steven. I guess the only thing I would tweak for a week like this would be a little bit more of like a studs and duds approach. I'd be more willing to perhaps take a few more guys down in the 6K range just because of the lack of a cut line. When we know everyone's going to play, all the holes out there, right? Going to get 72 in. Well, you'll take a shot on somebody that might not be very good placement wise, right? They might end up finishing in like 55th place. But if they can go out there and outscore their placement with birdie production, let's say that they're making 4.5, 5 birdies per round, that's viable this kind of week. So I try and lean into that a little bit more. But outside of that, I don't change up my process that much, which honestly, I don't think you want to overdo it too much. At least that's my thought on it. You need the PrizePicks locks. That's going on, Ryan. Yeah, we'll talk PrizePicks later. We're going to be on fantasy for a while, though, so you might want to do something else and come back if you're here for just that. What's going on, bots? Fred says, Windy C disrespected Af with the price tag. I think you're right there, man. He's a better player than the price tag, that's for sure. And can Homa turn it around this week? Me and you both need to know that thing. I don't know, man. He's playing really shitty, especially since that Masters. I think I'll say about Max Homa, kind of like Wyndham Clark. Wyndham Clark is $7,700. That is blasphemy. You've got Max Homa at $7,800. I mean, just for comparison, guys, Russell Henley is $8,600. He's a whole $800, $900 more expensive than those two players. Is just ridiculous. It makes no sense. So yeah, if this is a good week, by the way, if you're somebody that's willing to take guys that are out of form and just for transparency's sake, yeah, I'm playing all those guys, all these guys that are out of form. And I think I have a shot this week. It's a good week for that. Yeah, definitely a lot of guys I'd say that fit that description. Thoughts on the Postman? Such a perfect setup for him. I think it's a great setup. I do think he's going to be chalky, though. So I've got him at about 10% ownership right now, and I think that he's going to get steamed up. I could see him being 14, 15% owned. On every show that I've watched this week, somebody has mentioned JT Poston. On my first look on Monday, I was going through some of my top stat categories. He was showing up in the top 20 of almost every single stat category, and I was looking at chalky stuff, right? I wasn't looking at apex height out of the rough. I was looking at driving accuracy, which everyone's looking at fucking driving accuracy. I was looking at mid irons, which everyone is looking at mid irons this week, and he was popping there. Those Monday shows, when I see somebody that is just popping up time and time again, I know that they're going to be chalk. So the fact that JT Poston, and I think when I was looking at other ownership projections, at least earlier today, a lot of them didn't have Poston as extremely high owned. I think that's going to change. I would be completely mind blown if he would be sub 10%. Again, I have him at about that 10% number right now. And I wouldn't be surprised if he was 15% plus owned out there for tomorrow. And I still like him, and I'm still playing him, by the way. I'm still using him, but he's going to be chalky. That's the strange thing about that play, is I just think that the industry is wrong on the ownership projection. I don't care about it. I'm playing some chalk this week, that's for sure. Sam says, thoughts on Lucas Glover? Great comp course player. So if you take a look at my comp courses, I mentioned them out there in my Monday show, but I'll bring them up here once again. He's played well at the Wyndham Championship. He's played well at the John Deere. He's played well at the FedEx St. Jude. He's been top 5 there, I believe, 3 times out of the last 4 years. And he's been okay at the Honda Classic. The shorter par 70s, where it's more about position than it is power, are courses where Lucas Glover tends to play very well. So I like him this week. And of course, Kevin, so let's start talking about these players tier by tier. So what we're going to do here is just go through each tier, kind of point out some of the ownership trends and give you guys an idea of some of the last second plays that I wanted to point out. Which again, guys, it's not about me just pointing out guys to tail. That's not the point of me doing these live streams. It's more so to give you guys the perspective of how I'm selecting my player pool. There's certain kind of stats that I'm looking at, right? The ownership concerns that I'm going through, because just because I'm playing Xander up top and fading Scotty Scheffler does not mean that you have to do that yourself, right? Obviously, I have my reasoning for wanting to do something. Just have your own process and have your own reasoning for the plays that you make, right? And I think listening to other people's perspectives can be very valuable, right? First off, it's going to give you an idea of where other people are playing so that you can, use that knowledge and leverage that. So whether you want to, like, oh, well, someone like Luke, right, is playing somebody like Xander this week, maybe Scotty's lower owned than he should be. That would be a valid point to take from this, right? But the reason why I'm playing Xander over Scotty this week, and I think a lot of other people might do this too, and why it's why I have Scotty at sub 30% projected ownership, or right around 30%, is because Xander Schauffele is a better putter, right? And last year, this was putting contest. This was a birdie fest. And when we get to a birdie fest like this, sometimes Scotty Scheffler can struggle. Sometimes he has an inability to make enough of those 15 to 20 footers to go out there and get to something like 20 under par. Now, I think it's going to play harder this year. So I don't know if that's as much of a problem for Scotty Scheffler. But the one thing I do know about Xander Schauffele is that even when all things are equal, right? We're not looking at price tag at all. When I'm going through my modeling, I had Xander Schauffele as the better play this week. My modeling has him as the number 1 player in every category but the long-term fit, where Scotty Scheffler just ever so slightly out edges Xander Schauffele. So over the last 12 rounds, I've got Xander as clearly the better player. Scotty Scheffler, of course, he's not that far behind, right? He's my number 2 player, and at least for number 1 player for long-term fit. Number 2 player overall, I believe, in the overall rankings. I'd rather take the guy that's cheaper. He's $11,200, and the player that I have modeling a little bit better. So up top, pick your guys, right? Obviously, Rory withdrew, so don't play Rory this week if you didn't already know that. But Xander Schauffele, Aberg, whoever the case may be, all of these guys are going to get some ownership this week. And if you're going to play them, you're going to want to take them in at least 35, 40% of your lineups. Doing so is going to get you close to that 2x leverage. The thing you want to avoid here, at least, especially if you're not 150 maxing. If you're entering like 15, 20 lineups or less out there for this week, you can't play everyone up top. You just can't match the field. That would be paying the rake up top out there with your exposure. And you might be able to afford to do that if you're playing like 150 plus lineups. If you have a massive portfolio to work with, maybe a match up top and then you go more aggressive down low. You could probably pull that off. If you got 15 to 20 lineups, then forget it. You're absolutely dead in the water if you go out there and take that strategy. If you're going to do that, by the way, if you have 20 lineups and you're going to spread out all of your exposure up top, that means that you have like a core of 3, maybe 4 players down low that you're taking for every single lineup. So it's just not something that I would recommend out there for your exposure. So pick your guys. For me, I like Xander. Pointed him out. Obviously, Morikawa, Cantlay, 2 guys I talked up on the Monday show are guys that I'm also taking at higher exposure, but there are plenty of guys that I'm having to leave out of my player pool. I've already mentioned the reasoning for Scotty, right? I worry about the flat stick at a golf course like this that's so short. Aberg, I worry about him not being able to hit driver as much as he wants. Now, I said the same thing about him. This is a big disclaimer on the Aberg talk. Said the same thing at the RSM Classic, and he won that golf tournament, right? He just hit driver there and hit every single fairway, right? Proved everyone wrong. Went out there and still won that golf tournament. The difference here for Aberg is that this is a signature event. This isn't the RSM Classic where he's playing against Brendan Todd. Chris Kirk is the best players of the week. Who else played that week? I think it was like Sungjae Im was also teamed it up. He was another like $9,500 golfer that week. It's a difference, going out there and beating those kind of guys as opposed to when Xander's in the field. You're still playing against Scotty Scheffler on that kind of golf course. So that's why I'm avoiding Aberg for this kind of week. So just like I'm talking up a few players up here, you're going to have to find spots to avoid. So for you, if maybe this week you go, you know what? I want to fade guys like Cantlay that I think are just getting hot, right? And are going to fizzle out. then make that your thought process, right? Just have your own process for this week and go with it. So, a few of the guys that I like, you can choose to tail them or fade them all you like, right? I'm not going to make your lineups for you. But the important part up top, I guess, would be that no one's under-owned. Everyone's getting some ownership. Scotty would be the highest owned of the bunch, but he's not that much higher owned than some of the other options. I've got Xander as the second highest owned, and then guys like Aberg, Morikawa, Cantlay are all in that like 17 to 20% range. So it's pretty flat up top. That's why I say just to go out there and play your guys. There's no obvious fade spots. Like even Scotty Scheffler at 12,500 isn't going to be like 40% owned this week. And because he's not going to be 40% owned, that means that you can still take him as a leveraged play at about 40, maybe 50% of your lineup. So that's what I'll say about the elite tier range. And those are a few of the options that I'll be mixing in. A little bit further down, ownership starts to get more polarized. And by polarized, I mean we start to see more of a gap in the ownership. So rather than everyone kind of being like 20% owned, down here in the 8-9K range is where we have some guys that are truly chalky. And then we have in a few cases, not all that many, up here towards the top, a few pivot plays that you can mix in. So just to give you guys an idea of some of the chalk that's down here, you've got a little bit of chalk coming in on guys like a Russell Henley. He's close to about 20% ownership. I'd say that Corey Connors at his about 17, 18% ownership would also be a relatively chalky player. But on the flip side of things, you've got a sub 10% owned Jordan Spieth. You've got a relatively low owned Tommy Fleetwood, who's about 10, 11% ownership there himself. Rather than everyone up top having ownership and essentially, there being no spots to really get different to the field, down here in this 8-9K range, you start to see that dynamic come out, right? There are guys that are going to be harder to get leverage on, that you're going to have to take in like 40% of your lineups to get over the field. Those being some of the chalkier guys like a Connors, Henley, for example. And then on the flip side of things, if you're taking a bunch of chalk, right, maybe Jordan Spieth is a way to go out there and offset that. Now, even a Jordan Spieth supporter like myself, big fan out here, isn't playing much Jordan Spieth out here this week because of the injury, because of some of the narratives coming in. But he's one of the few options that you can use to get different here. So that's the one difference I would say between this 8-9K range and then what we have up top is that the ownership is a little bit less spread out, right? Up top, you just kind of pick your guys. You don't have to worry about ownership as much, in my opinion. But down here in the 8-9Ks, you can't just pick all of your dudes. If you do that, you're probably going to end up on all of the chalk. And if you end up doing that, you're really going to have to get different with your last spots in the 6 and 7K range. So it's just something to keep an eye on. Doesn't mean that you can't play chalky players in this range. It just means that if you do, you're going to have to compensate for that somewhere else in your lineup, whether that's with your value plays, whether that's potentially taking some sort of pivot here in that middle tier range. All of that has to be on the table. Worth noting that JT, I've got a sub 10% ownership himself. So I thought JT might get some steam because of the price tag. $8,500 in comparison to like a Henley, a Bradley, I thought was way too cheap. I mean, even guys like a Brian Harman, Jordan Spieth just being marginally cheaper than JT had me thinking, I guess incorrectly, that people would play the guy, that they would see JT at like $8,500 and go, you know what? Maybe it's not the worst idea to take a proven tour winner. Now, that hasn't happened, right? I've got him at sub 10%. And even if some late steam gets him to 11, maybe 12% ownership, that's way too low for somebody of JT's talent level. And the best part about him is that he doesn't have to win, right? I think the biggest gripe with JT would be like, oh, it's a signature event. He's not going to beat this kind of field. A top 10 might be enough at $8,500. So that's why I think that there's some upside to taking that kind of player. And he's the perfect example of a legit talent here in the 8K range that you might want to jam into lineups to get different with, right? It's not like a Jordan Spieth that's dealing with the injury, that's in just dreadful form other than the irons last week. You have somebody like JT that's playing much more reasonable golf. Down here towards the 7Ks, ownership is, I would say, very similar in dynamic. It's pretty polarized, just like you have in the 8 and 9K range. You've got some chalk like Sepp Straka, who we knew was going to be chalky this week. I knew he was going to be Sepp Chaka out there on a Monday, but that's okay at 15%. I'm still going to be playing him. Mentioned that right off the bat. But a little bit further down, you've got guys like Windy C kind of being overlooked. You've got relatively low-owned Cam Young, who's obviously completely out of form, right? That's why no one wants to play him. But he's $7,600 and he's sub 7% ownership. Sibu Kim getting some attention. Christian Bazane, who also getting some attention himself. JT Poston as well. I think that he's going to be 10% plus owned. But if you look to some of the other names like Jason Day, for example, if you keep going down a little bit further, Taylor Pendrith not getting that much attention. Guys like a Steven Yeager, a Justin Rose are going to be sub 5% owned. There are a lot of options down here that you can get that mega leverage on. So that's the beauty of having polarized ownership, right? When it's not just all spread out, you're going to have spots that are going to be essentially unowned that you can take in even like 10, 15% of lineups and be well over the 2x mark on. So I think that there's a lot of low-owned, high upside options that you can take down here in the sevens. And a few pieces of chalk that I am mixing in. So like Sepp is a great example of that, right? Like he's going to be 15%. He's not going to be one of those lower-owned options. I'm going to have guys like that mixed into my player pool. But when I use an option like that down here in the 7K range, it's oftentimes going to be with a JT to offset that ownership. Maybe a Tommy Fleetwood at sub 15% to try and offset some of the ownership I'm taking down low. Because your lineup construction is what matters when you're playing PGA DFS. It's not about individual plays. It's not about going out there and saying like, oh, that guy's just like too highly owned. If you think that he's going to play well in a given week and he projects well, you're allowed to play chalk. You just have to think about how you're using that piece of chalk. You can't be using them with a bunch of other high-owned pieces, or else you're going to have no shot out there in the big field GPPs. Just set yourself up for success and don't outthink yourself out of plays. In the past, I had been very guilty of not playing chalky guys that I thought would play well just because they were chalk, right? And there are pieces of chalk that you should be avoiding, right? Pieces of ownership that you should be excluding out of your player pool, but don't just avoid the chalk just to avoid the chalk. It's about doing it selectively, trying to pick the pieces that you think are actually going to hit, and then leveraging off the ones that you don't. So that's what I'll say about that. In terms of some cheaper plays, I like Akshay Bhatia at 7,200. I know somebody mentioned him before. I don't have him as an extremely low-owned play, but 8.8% is also not all that bad. So I've got him as a decent option, and the price tag's great, $7,200 for a player of his caliber. He's got a lot of top 10 potential, plenty of top 20 potential, and at $7,200, that's kind of what we're looking for. Still like Tom Hoge. I've got Tom Hoge at sub 10%, so surprisingly, not that many people playing Tom Hoge. So I kind of thought he might be 10% plus. I thought that people might want to get to him because of his skill set, right? Mid-irons, people are really looking for that around a Travelers Championship, but not so much. So yeah, 7.6% owned, definitely something that I'll get over the field on. Austin Eckert at $6,800. I have it about 5% ownership. Another player that I thought might get attention because of his skill set fit. Has played well at a lot of my comp courses, accurate off the tee, really good mid-iron player. But because the recent form has been sketchy, it hasn't been his best over the last 3 or 4 starts. You see, I've got him at about 5% ownership. So, there's going to be some guys. I know somebody mentioned Brendan Todd before. Course fits that I take despite the form. And I think Austin Eckert is a great example. The last one I'll go through, and by the way, I'm playing Brendan Todd. I know somebody asked about it before. I guess just to let you know, let you see behind the curtain a little bit. Yes, I am playing Brendan Todd, but Eric Cole would fit that same kind of description. He's about 3% owned out there in GPPs. His form is mediocre at best heading into this golf tournament, but he fits the shorter tracks well. And the first time that he had really showed up after having a really tough 2024 was at the Valero Texas Open, which was a shorter par 70. A lot of the same stats that we're looking at this week were stats that we were looking at Valero, which is like the Russell Henleys that were showing up, right? Corey Connors, always a guy that we're looking at the Valero Texas Open. You know who else showed up there? Eric Cole, right? So at 3.2% projected ownership, a player that I'll take for some of my lineups. Down low, if you're looking for some of the chalk, I've got some steam coming in on Svensson. I've got him like 7% owned. I also have Lee Hodges at about 6.5%, 7% ownership there too, and Seamus Power. So surprisingly, these 3 options that are all $6,400 or $6,500 are some of the more popular options down low. And though I didn't mention anything about Mr. Thorbjornsen, I was highly considering keeping this to myself. Michael Thorbjornsen. Okay, so I said this about Aberg last year. I'm going to say it again. This could really bite me, okay, guys? Michael Thorbjornsen will be a top 30 player on the PGA Tour by this time next year. I said this about Aberg a little bit after this event. It was after we had seen him on the DP World Tour a few times, and he looked like an absolute stud. Michael Thorbjornsen, by the way, has top 5 at this golf tournament before. Now, you've probably seen touts mention that this week, but they won't mention about Michael Thorbjornsen is that he's been just as good, if not better, than Ludwig was out there on the college circuit. And a lot of times there's a lot of hype behind these players and they end up getting overhyped. I can tell you that at least per my ownership projections, no one's playing the guy this week. And he might just be an $8,000 golfer in this field. I mean, look at Aberg. He's a $10,000 golfer, right? And a year ago, he was an amateur in the same situation, right, as Michael Thorbjornsen. If Thorbjornsen is putting up the same college stats as Aberg, and again, I think to expect that kind of talent level would be foolish, right, out of this kind of player. But if he's even just like a decent PGA Tour player, which I think he's going to be, I think he's going to be a well above average PGA Tour player when he gets out here. He shouldn't be $6,500. Not at a course that he's top 5'd at before, right? He's proven that he can do it at the Travelers Championship, and not at a player that's essentially going to be unknown. So if you were playing him this week and were hoping that I wouldn't say anything, I'm sorry. I was considering not saying anything myself. But this kid is the next big thing on the PGA Tour. He has this, by the way, he had the same exemption as Aberg, right? That's why he's playing this event for the first time as a professional this week. He's not going to be $6,500 for very often. Let's just say that much. I would imagine that he's probably going to do pretty decent this week, if I had to guess. And if he does, he might be an $8,000 golfer by the next time that we see him. So I'm jumping on early, especially at relatively low ownership at a place that he's done it at before. And that was before he really grew into the golfer that he is today. And from everything that I've seen, and from all accounts from people that I've heard from on Michael Thorbjornsen, he's a much better player now than what he was back there a few years ago. And the guy was in contention to win this golf tournament that year. So I think that says a lot about his long-term talent and a player that I'm going to try and be early on. So let's catch up a chat, see what's going on. And then we're going to talk some prop stuff, guys. So let's see what's going on. Where are we at? What's going on, Ryan? Let's see. You'll be back for PrizePicks. Okay, good to know. But you love golf to death, and Rory is your favorite golfer back to Ryder Cup. Do you think he wins another major? And you said, sorry, bro, off topic. Hey, it's a golf question. You're good, dude. If you're talking about like some MMA shit right now, I might give you a little shit for that. But you're good, Ryan. I do think he'll win another major. I don't know if it's going to be more than one, though. I've gone back and forth on it a few times this week, though. At first, when he blew that lead, I was like, okay, he's never winning a major again. One thing you'll say is if he does have like a 5-6 shot lead, he can close one out. So it's a tough scene, Ryan. We're going to have to see how he comes back from that. It was that Sunday. I talked a lot about this on the podcast I did with my boy Byron, also out there with Spence, Tee Off Sports. On Monday, we did a little bit of a podcast together. We talked about it a lot. I think I said on that podcast he wouldn't win one again, but now I'm on this side that he will win one. We'll have to see. He's a nutcase, and I'm a nutcase on him right now. I have no idea what to think. Thoughts on Brian Harman? I think he'll be chalky, Sam. Part of that is the course history, which is excellent. So I don't know if we want to hold that against him too much, right? He models extremely well for this golf course. He's got the accuracy we want. Mid-irons are good enough for Brian Harman. I wouldn't call it a strength for him, but it's good enough, serviceable is, I think, a good way to describe his mid-iron play. And then the course history, I mean, it's just the creme of the creme, right? I mean, if you're looking for top-tier course history, he's got it. He's got 4 top 8 finishes out of his last 5 starts. Did miss the cut one time, which not ideal, but when you've got 4 top 8 finishes outside of that, that's pretty solid stuff there. So chalky, but potentially worth it. Steven Yeager thoughts. Low owned. I love the iron play, but he is a driver heavy guy. He's a very aggressive player off the tee, and he's not very accurate, which is unfortunate for this week. What is the main difference between total model ranking and then my other ones? I'm not in the course fit. You're saying, okay, I didn't see your next comment. So course fit is how they fit a golf course, right? So you can see I have 3 different rankings on here. Total Model ranking is the combination of these other 2 categories. We have recent form ranking and then course fit ranking. Recent form ranking is just how they're playing recently. It is quite literally just a ranking of their shots gained metrics. So the number 1 player in the field, Xander Schauffele, right, has the highest shots gained over his last 12 rounds. So that's why he's number 1 in recent form ranking. There's no course involved here. There's no tournament fit involved here. This is just purely who's playing the best golf right now, right? That's the recent form ranking. And that's why it's the exact same as the shots gained per round. Course fit ranking is how do they play this week, right? How do their stats over the last, and it changes. Sometimes it's 24. Sometimes I zoom out, use 36, 48 measured rounds. How do they fit this specific week? So that caters towards the stats that I'm looking at for any given golf tournament and is the bigger factor out there with my total mono ranking. So total mono ranking, this is how you should be thinking about DFS in general, right? DFS in general should be a combination of a player's overall pedigree and then how they fit that specific golf course and then also how they're playing coming in, right? So how I do that with my total mono ranking is I combine those 2, right? I'm not going to give away exactly how I do that. That is proprietary, right? That's how I use my process, rank my players, et cetera, but that's how it's done. Is I combine those 2, you get the actual full picture idea of how somebody fits a golf course. That's what total mono ranking is. So great question, by the way. I've gone over that a few times before, but if you're new, I guess good thing to cover that. Thoughts on Tommy Boy? Low owned, decent course fit. So I'm at a 6.5 out of 10 on him, James. I kind of like him, but I don't love him. You're between the 3, who would I play? Between Henley, Connors, or Harman? My favorite's Connors. All of that is the stats. He's my top model ranking this week. So honestly, if anyone asks me a question about just like my top play in general, it's Corey Connors. So if he's an option, it's Corey for me. What course is this most like? So here are a few examples. So these comp courses are the courses that I think place the most like what we're going to have this week. FedEx St. Jude, that would be the TPC Southwind. You got a few other TPC courses on here as well with 3M Open and John Deere. PJ National Championship course, that's Honda/Cognizant Classic. And then also the Wyndham Championship, Sedgefield Country Club would be a few good places to start. And you said in a few good players that have played there. So yeah, just if you go on any database and bring up the golf course, you'll be able to take a look at those leaderboards. Rory's going to win the Open. It'd be good to see for him. I have my restraints on thinking he's going to do that. He's got to get the 6-shot lead, right? What's going on? What's going on, Angelita? And we're going to do that later, James. We're doing this for now. What's going on, John? You said Rory's going to have to win to impress his new girlfriend. Yeah, you're right. He's got to woo over his new wife. Hey, he called off the divorce, so I guess he doesn't need a new girlfriend now. One and done, you're in first place. It's a good spot to be. Congrats. And you've got Burns, Finau, Aberg, or Harman. So if you're in first place, you don't have to worry about getting that much different. I don't know if I would burn Aberg here just because I don't think it's the greatest course fit. I wouldn't be against Burns or Finau. They're going to be relatively popular this week too. So I'm assuming you're saving Scotty. Maybe you already used Scotty Scheffler. If I was going to play one and done this week, I'd be playing Corey Connors if you had him. If you want to take one of those other options, I would go with Tony Finau. The only reason I say the Tony Finau one is Tony Finau's putting for once. And that's a rare sight and something that you normally want to tail with him. What's going on, Bruce? In a 3-max, do I prefer a small pool with duplicates or more unique lineups? I'm not sure what you mean by that, by a small pool with duplicates. So, yeah, go ahead and add on to that, clarify what you mean by that, and I can give you a response. I'm not sure what you're asking. David says, thoughts on JT Poston? I think he's a great play. If you circle back, Dave, I talked about him a lot earlier, so check up on that. Ross says, oh, yeah, damn, you take it back. Single Rory wins the Open. Married Rory top 5. Yeah, dude, right? He called off the divorce, so it's, I don't know. The shots gained single Rory. I mean, he won the Memorial as a single guy, and now he had the collapse as a married guy. I don't know, tough scene out there. All right, let's bring up Draftkings and build a lineup together. So if we're going to build GPP lineups, your thought process, has to change based on the players that you're using. If you're going to be a little bit chalkier up top, and let's say use a Straka at 7,900. Let's say in this 8K range, you're a big Corey Connors guy. Like, I'm going to have lineups this week, guys. They're going to have Straka and Connors together. They're both just players that model off the board for me. They're guys that are some of the best values compared to price tag on the board. And if I'm going to use them in lineups, I can't just play whoever the hell I want. Right? If I go up top and I'm going to mix in another relatively chalky piece like Xander Schauffele, well, then we're really getting ourselves into a corner here. Now we've got 3 spots to essentially get all our leverage to the field, which we can make happen, but we can't be mixing in any more chalk. So with the rest of this build, we're going to have to be very cognizant about where the exposure is coming in. So for our next option towards the top end of the 7K range, it probably wouldn't be a great idea to take somebody that's going to be like 15% owned. So for example, maybe a solid option to get a little bit different here would be a Wyndham Clark. I've got it sub 10%. You can say that about Cam Young, right? Taking a player that's not going to be super popular down here towards the middle end of the 7K range. Maybe avoid a Sibu Kim, who's going to be like 12, 13% owned, and then take that option that's a little bit lower owned in a Cam Young. So the consequence of me taking some of my more popular options up top is that I'm going to have to get a little bit funkier down here in the 7K range. Now that we have like 2 guys that are sub 7%, if we do want to take like an Akshay to round this off, you could probably make it work even for the big 15 or big $5 GPP. But this kind of lineup should give you an idea of your thought process, right? Like if you're starting with pivots up top, so let's say that you weren't taking a Straka, maybe you were going with a Homa instead, who was slightly lower owned. Maybe instead of a Corey Connors, you took JT instead. Even if you took Xander Schauffele up here, you could afford to take more chalk now, right? In this kind of lineup, even if you wanted to take Straka here now, right, as a 7K option, you could, because you have a JT and a Max Homa already in your lineup. So you just, this doesn't mean, by the way, that you play Straka in every lineup, by the way. I'm just showing that if you wanted to play chalk like him, you could, whether that's Sunjay M, whether it's taking a chalky or Tom Kim, who's also getting some ownership himself. The way to offset that are with lower owned options like a Homa or JT. So when you're building GPP lineups, just make sure that you're molding your lineup and kind of accounting for the other guys that are already being used. And for cash lineups, I don't know. I wouldn't play cash this week. If I'm going to be frank with you guys, I play cash when there's a big edge to be had. A lot of times that's weather based. When I see a weather edge out there for main slate, I'll go out there. I'll throw in $500 to $1,000 of cash lineups. But without a weather edge, not my favorite game to play. So we're going to stay away from cash. If you have any specific questions about cash players, I'll let you know down in chat. But the only guy I would consider almost a must play, I guess, would be Scotty at 12.5. The counter argument, though, would be price tag, right? If you don't want to spend that $12,500, that's the one scenario where maybe you avoid Scotty Scheffler. And if you do so, I wouldn't mind just living in the 9Ks. Like, I love Morikawa at this golf course. I like the idea of potentially going Cantlay, throwing in like a Sahith who's played well at this golf course. A Brian Harman, I have to say, it might be my favorite cash play this week with all those top 8 finishes that he has. This kind of lineup, and actually, I really like Corey Connors this week. So if you wanted to start like a 9K and take like a Connors, Harman, maybe even throw Russell Henley into this kind of lineup, this hyper balanced build might be it for cash as well, right? Because now we have 2 spots left and we still have like 7,500 per spot. This for cash makes a lot of sense. So I think there's a few different ways they could go about it, but I'm not going to be playing myself. Let's put it that way. Cash for a signature event is just absolute AIDS in my opinion. I mean, normally you have to go out there and try and get 6 of 6. And that's a good way to go out there and cash lineup. Not so much this time. Right. All right, where are we at? Let's catch up on chat. By the way, that's it for the DFS section. So if you guys were just here for DFS, go ahead, smash that like button on your way out of here. And best of luck with all of your lineups this week. I'll still go over any of your questions if you have them down in chat. So if you want any of that last second advice, let me know down below. But now we're going to turn our focus towards props. So I've got a few ideas over there on Underdog and PrizePicks, a few slips that we're going to share here. And we're going to turn our focus over there to that. So just a little PSA for all of you DFS peeps. I know some of you guys, right, pop in here for that and then hopping out of here, which couldn't blame you, right? If you're not a prop guy, probably don't want to hear somebody just yap about props for 15 to 20 minutes. So if that's you, just smash the like button on the way out of here. Best of luck, and I'll see you guys for those round 2 through 4 streams. But let's catch up on chat and then figure out this prop stuff. Which, speaking of, I'm going to bring up the prop averages on screen so that you guys have that to look at while I'm yapping about chat. And let's do this thing. Let's see. So this was a Thor Bjornsson quote. This is definitely your home. You love this place. It's so close to home. Yeah. So yeah, he's from the Northeast as well. So he's got that going for him too. And he shot 15 under the Travelers. Yeah, he was in contention out there till Sunday. So it's not even like he just like played at the event. He played very well out there. In a 3-max, do I prefer playing each player only once or having several in like 2 to 3 lineups? I see what you're saying, Bruce. So that's kind of like a preference thing. I'll do it both ways, right? So I'll do it where I have 3 lineups and there's 0 crossover. And I would say that I do that more often than the flip side, where sometimes I'll play somebody in all 3 lineups. So for example, Scotty this week, like if you're a big Scotty Scheffler guy, I could see scenarios where I would be playing him in all 3 lineups out there in a 3-max. However, this week, because I'm not playing Scotty Scheffler and I'm spreading it out up top, I would probably take the other approach, right? Where I wouldn't be duplicating players across lineups. To me, that changes based on each slate that I'm entering. And honestly, my goal with that GPP, if I'm trying to go out there and it's a bigger 3-max and it's more of like a lottery sort of style, I usually won't duplicate. I'll usually just do 3 completely unique lineups. If I'm going out there and it's like a smaller field contest where a top 5 would be pretty nice, sometimes I do duplicate players, and it'll be like a Scotty Scheffler that I play in all 3 lineups. So it kind of depends. The $15 Millie Maker didn't have any players less than 10% owned. It's surprising with a contest that large, someone can win that. Thoughts on how it wasn't duplicated? So it's not duplicated because there's so many golfers to choose from. And the $15 Millie Maker last week did have guys that were less than 10% owned because there were 150 something players. So that it's just impossible for there not to be guys that were sub 10% owned. You might have been talking about Showdown, I'm guessing. I'm not sure what slate that you're referring to because that wasn't the case for the US Open. US Open had a full field. There's no way that there weren't guys that weren't sub 10% owned. It's hard to win any GPP, man. It's like any other sport that you're playing, right? NBA GPPs are tough. And it's not so much the ownership that I think makes it tough because there are chalkier sports that have more entries, right? That I've won plenty of GPPs on. I've won golf GPPs before too, right? But in NBA, usually the winning lineups will have guys that are like 60, 70% owned in them. A lot of them are the value plays that you play for like NBA DFS. I understand the sentiment of your question, but that's not that uncommon. Like there are other sports where it's even crazier, man, when it comes to the ownership and it's like tougher to take down GPPs. Best example, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with this. If you play golf DFS, you probably play NFL DFS. I know a vast majority of people do. It's by far the biggest DFS sport. Showdowns like that on crazy, like steroids, right? Going out there trying to take guys that are 70% owned to get different. It's tough. Luckily for us, because even in a signature event, even like after the cut, right, we have 60 players to choose from. At least we have more guys that are viable. In showdown football, there's like 15 guys that are viable. It's way harder out there when we have it that way. When we have 60 golfers or even 150 in a full field event, it's a lot easier. All right, let's talk about some props now. So let's circle back to this golf course. So golf course in 2023 played pretty much the easiest that it ever has. This 1.6 under par was the lowest, I believe, the last 5 seasons. Birdie average was the highest we've had in a while. You name it, right? Pretty much every metric was easier. Main reason for that was how soft the golf course was. They got a lot more rain last year, and you saw that with the scoring, right? It's why 23 under par ended up winning this golf tournament. This year, and I'm actually just going to bring this up for you guys, the Cromwell monthly weather. So a lot of times when you start researching a golf course, something that people like myself will do when you're going out there and trying to get a course report is you'll take a look at the monthly weather, right? You'll try and see like what the hell's happened in this part of the country the last few weeks because it matters, right? You hear about it for every single golf tournament. Well, Cromwell, Connecticut has gone over the last week 0.34 inches of rain, which by the way is extremely low. That's I don't know if it's like non-existent, but they've essentially gone no rain the last 7 days. Into the month, a little bit 2/3 into the month, they've gone 0.63 inches of rain. You'll see down here towards the bottom that their average in June this month is 4.46 per month. So they are way, way under this monthly average, and they're 2/3 of the way through, right? So it's not like we're 5 days into the month, right? And they've had 0.6 inches of rain. We are 19 days into June, and there's only been 0.6 inches. And what you'll see over this last week is the last time that it rained out of the last 10 days was over here on the 14th, and that's when they got that 0.3 inches. So this golf course has had plenty of time to dry. It is going to be baked out there tomorrow. And tomorrow, the temperatures, by the way, just to show you guys that, it's going to be 95 degrees out there. So if we go over here to this HRRR model, which is, of course, the more accurate one 24 hours out, it's going to be 90 degrees by noon and then 95 for pretty much the entire PM wave. I think the golf course is going to play significantly harder than I think everyone else does, because even if you take a look at the data golf projections and their showdown stuff, they still think it's going to play like a stroke and a half under. The sports books, Underdog, PrizePicks, they all have this priced like it's going to play exactly like it did last year, which I think is just a glaring mistake. If you take a look at any of the renovation stuff that they talked about with this course, first off, they made the course harder. They took 6 holes and quite literally made competitive enhancements, which, by the way, just means we're going to try and make this place harder out there from last year. So 6 holes are 100% going to be more difficult this year. It's drier this time. It's not going to be as soft. It's going to be windy in the afternoon, right? If we take a look at this weather. Oh, what am I even saying there? My bad. I say some stupid shit when I have to talk and yap so much out here in a live stream. But you'll see in the afternoon, it's going to be pretty gusty out there, right? 15, maybe even 20 mile an hour wind gust out there towards the end of the day. I think it's going to play at best, maybe like 1.2 under par, which would be about 0.4 strokes harder than what we had last year. I think it might even play less than a stroke under par. So this golf course, and by the way, there's precedent for this too, right? So it's not just like last year was super easy and it's never harder. If you go back to 2022, it only played 0.61 under par. Now, Xander still got to 19 under par that year, but it wasn't an entire stroke easier like you had last year. Go to the year before that, it played 0.33 under par, right? You go to the season before that, it played 1.3 under par, right? So every other year, right, it's played easier than we had last year. I think we're going to see something like 2021 or 2022 here where it played less than a stroke under par. So if that's the case, I think there's a lot of fade value on sites like an Underdog and potentially even some fade value on sites like over here on PrizePicks. So if we do some comparison to sports books, we can find some value and hopefully make this thing work. So in terms of actually giving you guys some exposure, we're going to start with PrizePicks. So it's going to be one prop for sure that we're going to go with. And let me think about the other one to give you. Let's do this. So we're going to go an under on Benny Ann fairways and an under on JT. And actually, I'm just going to give you all 3 of them. I took these 3 for a slip. So this is actually the exact piece of exposure that I got to. But it's these 3 under on fairways. And the reason why I took these 3 in particular is as follows. So the average last year for fairways hit was 8.75 per round. Because of how soft the course was, the extra rain that they've done, the fairway average last year was significantly higher than what we're used to seeing. And a lot of years, it's usually closer to like 8.5 per round here around the Travelers Championship. But with the extra rain, that obviously went up. This season, now that it's drier, that average is probably going to go back down to the 8.5 per round. But the real X factor that I don't think anyone else is thinking about, definitely not PrizePicks and definitely not Underdog, and heck, not even these prop sites like Caesars, I think you're thinking about this, is part of the changes to the golf course were tightening fairways. Now, there's not a whole lot of literature out on the changes of what they've changed about TPC River Highlands, but I can tell you that hole number 1, 6, 11, there's at least 1 or 2 other ones too where they tightened up the fairway area. It's going to be harder to hit fairways just because the fairways are smaller this year. So if they have smaller fairways, it's drier, it's firmer, faster, so balls are going to be rolling out more. That fairway average is for sure going down. It is not going to go up, I can tell you that much. Out there since 2023, in these 3 players that we're fading are all outside the top 100 on tour and driving accuracy. So Benny Ann, for example, is like 110. I know JT was like number 105, and same thing for Wyndham Clark in that same range for driving accuracy. These three players I'll hammer for unders because first off, they'd be projecting under this number anyways, but the average is like 8.7 per round, and they're dog shit at hitting fairways, right? Ranked outside the top 100 on tour. But now when you add in the fact that it's drier and the fairways are smaller, that's going to make these even better plays. So a payout's not great. You only get a 4.25x for taking 3 fades. But the idea here is that if the fairways are in fact smaller and it is drier, the average for fairways might be like 8 per round, right? It might go down way significantly compared to what we had last year. And if it's 8 per round, guys like Benny Ann, Thomas, and Clark project for like 7.5 or 7 fairways per round. So you're just trying to get some correlation here. You're trying to hope that that narrative ends up being right. And if so, we might end up cashing a whole 4.25x card. So it's not like I'm counting on this hitting. It's not like I think it's a for sure hit rate, but based on all the literature that I've seen about the course changes and the weather heading in, as I showed you with this monthly weather, it looks like it's going to be a lot drier this time. So that's what I'm doing out there on the PrizePicks side. In terms of underdog exposure, there's a more creative exposure I'm getting to over here. So the first prop I think hasn't moved. Let's see. Did they move my Hovland prop? So no, they didn't end up bumping this yet. It's an over on Victor Hovland bogeys. And then we can actually match it up with this one too. So let's do that. So it's going to be an over on Ludwig Aberg bogeys. So this is only going to pay 2.5x, which is going to happen when you have a 0.9x multiplier. But let me show you why I like these over on bogeys. So if we go over here on Caesars / William Hill, you'll see that Ludwig Aberg here is at 1.5 bogeys or worse, and he's minus 200 for the over. Victor Hovland, for example, is at 2.5 bogeys, right? So an entire bogey higher, and he's juiced towards the under for sure, but he's an entire bogey higher. So with him at even money, that's what you're getting over here in underdog, and Aberg only a 0.9x multiplier on a prop that's minus 200 odds. This actually pays out a lot better than it should if you're comparing to the sportsbook odds. So look at that. They watch the live streams. They take stuff off when they see me pointing it out to people. Luckily, me and the Patreon members took this on Monday, so we were able to lock that in. But yeah, this Aberg one with the 0.9x, I would still play. And if you need a pairing for that, let me find you guys something. So they had Sahith at 0.9x too. I wouldn't hate this. And again, the payout's not ideal. This is only 2.2x. But Sahith should be at like 2.5 bogeys. Like he's an entire bogey off here, which is a 67% difference in projection. I mean, it's a massive difference when you look at it that way. If Aberg is minus 200 odds towards the over, Sahith would be like minus 300 odds out there for the over 1.5. So that's what I would take an underdog. They're really quick at the bumps. They're absolutely bitch made over there. We know this out there with those lines makers. But as per usual, all of my exposure is posted over there on the Patreon page. So whether it's my DFS player pool, projections, ownership, all of that is posted there for the DFS tab. And of course, on the prop tier is where I post all of my slips. So whether it's my PrizePicks exposure, the 5 slips that we've entered on Underdog so far, all of that can be yours over there if you go ahead and check out the Patreon. Before we end this thing and go over any last questions, I do want to take a look at the Pick 6 board, which I haven't had a chance to look at quite yet, but we'll take a look at here in a second. Let's catch up on chat, see what's going on. Crown is slapping. It is Red Bull. There is no crown in the system. Your crown must be slapping, bud. What's going on? Michael says, check again. It's Bryson, Finau, Aberg, Henley, Hideki. Oh, you're saying the winner. I see what you're saying. You said the $15 Millie Maker didn't have any players. You mean the winner of the $15 Millie Maker. I got you, dude. The word winner is where we were. We had the disconnect there. Because if you would have said that, I would have been 100% with you on that. Because, yeah, having a bunch of 10% plus owned guys doesn't happen often. And, yeah, like you said, NBA and NFL, really chalky. Like crazy, crazy chalky. You can play the PrizePicks slips on Underdog for a better payout, then do it. Are they at the same exact lines? Because I don't think they are, right? If they are, then go for it. So they have Benny Ann at the same projection. They might actually have them all 8.5. If they do, then go for it. That's your exposure, right? Yeah, and it is BS that they do that. But hey, it happens every stream. They don't stand behind their projection. That tells you everything you need to know about their lines maker. And you said, do I like Finau under 9.5 fairways? I think that's a decent projection. I didn't enter it myself, But if you subscribe to the theory that the fairways are going to be harder to hit, then I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to say. So, all right, guys, that's all I've got for the live stream. I'm going to go ahead and hop on out of here. Best of luck with all of your exposure this week. And I'll see you guys for the round 2 through 4 live streams. Those will be live half an hour, maybe an hour after play ends. So stay tuned to my X/Twitter for a notification on that. Also, subscribe to the channel so you get a notification when I'm going live with those. And let's crush all of our exposure for this week. We're going to have the signature event. I forget what tournament's next week, but then we got Scottish Open and then Open Championship on the schedule. It's just a few weeks away from another one of those majors. So some people might have a little bit of a major hangover on this kind of week, which I understand. I sort of empathize with you right after what we had with Rory and Bryson. But by the time we get to the weekend here and it's Scotty going against Xander and we've got essentially everyone but Rory in this field, I think people are going to be back into the whole golf side of things. So I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully we can make it a solid weekend for our exposure. And I'll see you guys for those live streams throughout the weekend.